Good morning. This is officially the only other early bird session that we've done other than Mies Mata for the Anatomy podcast. And because we have actually 3 episodes in queue along with this one, depending on how long the process ends up taking, we're not going to say it's 44, 45, or 46. We're just going to say it's another session. But it is currently 6:03 a.m. for me over here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. For Paul Visser over in the UK, is it like the afternoon, the later morning? Like
it is midday, man.
Midday.
Right in the yeah.
Shit, man. Well, I mean, at least across the pond, you're already halfway through your day. So, and it's not like when we do our anatomy podcast sessions based in Australia to where it's like midnight or something, you know what I mean?
No, I'm cool, man. I started at 6 a.m. as well, so I've been I think today is going to be a long one because we've got rehearsals and stuff. So
right,
I'm buckled up for a long ride.
absolutely, man. Sounds good. Well, today we are hosting Paul Visser on the Anatomy podcast, who participates in Black Orchid Empire. This is a rock band from the UK that I was recently requested to check out by James, another individual behind this team that's been just really helping me get associated with all these strange, foreign, but really, really good bands. As we continue to just keep cranking and try to find as many musicians as possible each and every day. Black Orchid Empire being one of them. They have a new record coming out, Tempus Veritas, and that's also something that we hope to talk with Paul about today. But as you guys know, with the Anatomy podcast, we have a formula that we try to stick to whilst also being as organic, as smooth flowing as possible. And I mean, essentially, we will be learning as much as we can about Paul this morning as a musician and as a person, what he feels is relevant to that musical side of his life. And then we will go ahead and talk plenty about Black Orchid Empire. So for starters, Paul, how are you doing this morning, sir?
I'm very, very well, mate. How are you?
I am just tired. I'm not used to being up this early anymore for a podcast session, but I mean, old habits come back, old habits die hard, and I'm glad we're doing another early morning session because otherwise I'd be chain smoking my vape and listening to a new album and just like kind of bopping my head like, yeah, this is interesting. I'm like in my head just I want to go back to bed so bad. Like you got to keep grinding, you know what I mean? And I also love having a reason to wake up earlier in the morning. I don't know, there's just something rewarding about that. And unless if you're like a nocturnal human being per se, a night owl, maybe where you live is like too hot, Arizona being a good example, maybe it's too dry, maybe the people could be like not as entertaining as it could be, like the atmosphere and the local community might not be as intriguing as possible. So I completely understand those of you around the world listening to this podcast who might be night owls, and this might be your application. This might be the thing you're checking out while you're, living your kind of quiet overnight life. And if that is the case, I am honored to be applied to that process. But like I said, we will be talking about Paul, with Paul, and also about Black Orchid Empire, this lovely, heavier rock band. But to be honest, it's actually ended up being the only band on my channel that happens to not have heavy vocals in it. Like I remember checking out Deny the Sun, and I was like, okay, is there going to be heavies in it though? And that was just like at the back of my mind. But then when it didn't, I'm like, okay, yeah, I actually prefer it without, because instrumentally speaking, as far as the general sound, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Ginger from Ukraine.
Awesome.
Yes, you guys ended up reminding me a lot of them with like your instrumental efforts and stuff. Like you don't go as heavy as them, right? But like there's almost a sense of like, I don't know, the only term I can think about is foreign. Like when I think of music like Black Orchid Empire, Ginger, Croesus, it's like there's a lot of musical inclination kind of blossoming and blooming from the music itself, but it ends up being really educated, really intelligent, but it almost sounds like it could be made by aliens, and I love that. Um
It's actually I'm the only British guy in the band. So there's also Dave's from Napier in New Zealand, and Billy's he's from Wichita Falls in Texas, man. So he's American. So it's actually kind of a mishmash of different things. But I don't really, yeah, I wonder why that would be. It's for me the whole like heavy vocal thing is I love it, but it's not something I've ever done.
mm,
On the other hand, I love melody. And so do the other boys. The way we write, by the way, is we all collaborate on all of the different aspects. So it isn't like only my influence on in terms of the melody and the lyric and the kind of the part of the song that is dealing with the narrative. That's all
yeah,
all three of us. So it's it really is like a mishmash of all of our different influences. But
good,
we work,
awesome.
we work as producers on other people's music all the time, and as pop writers and as rock writers and as different types of sort of music writers. So I think for me, what's always been really important is that if a song is worth hearing, it's worth like keeping in your brain and not being able to get rid of it, and being that kind of catchy, hooky melody stuff is really important to me. So I think that's where that comes from. Plus, it's just not. I'm not a scream vocalist, and we've never felt the inclination to do that.
Right.
Riffs wise, like it does get kind of heavy, and especially on this new record, there's some parts where there's some breakdowns and some bigger, like heavier riffs, but it's still always like in a melodic place vocally.
Yeah. And no, I really do prefer that. I think that among all of the titans right now that are really making steps for heavier music like Lorna Shore and stuff, it's
Mm-hmm.
important to also be able to like flip the coin around and just have a band that could be heavy. And people are over time, they could be like, oh, where are the heavy vocals, man? You guys got breakdowns, but you got heavy vocals. You're like,
Yeah.
nah. I think it really just distinguishes you from most bands and rock in general. Like you're so close. You're like the skateboard, right? That's like
Yeah.
grinding on that rail, and
Yeah.
you're flying a curb down the road, and then you
Mm.
hop off. Like that's kind of what Black Orchid Empire is, as far as like kind of just scraping the boundaries between rock
Yeah.
and metal. But I love it. It's so cool. It's so individual. Pardon me. And Deny the Sun, dude. I have to admit, since the first time I heard that down, 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 like the main riff, and just like Deny the Sun, it's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
just in my head, dude, just playing over and over again. And to
And so when
think,
I wonder if that would be the same on that topic. If it was exactly the same riff, but it was just over the top of
yeah,
it. Like I don't know, maybe, but who knows? Right? I feel like a good part of the catchiness comes from the fact that that melody wants to stay in your brain.
yes,
And
exactly. And
really,
like, yeah, you go ahead. Sorry.
and then I was just thanking you for making me feel good about myself.
Oh yeah, dude, hell yeah, that's what we're about here on the podcast.
Exactly.
No, it's been really fun, and I think, like you said too, regarding that, if there was heavy vocals over it, it might actually distract from that main catchy riff, unless like they kind of went Attila Franz, like unless you went Attila Franz and started like rapping over that riff somehow,
Yeah.
some way, and then also did heavy vocals, people would be like, oh my God, and like then all the attention would like be directed towards you. And anyways, it would be directed towards you because aren't you like the main riff lord for Black Orchid Empire? Like you're the guy that would go like down 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 down
I'm
down down.
definitely the starting point for a lot of those riffs. Yeah, I mean, we're a three piece, so if
Right.
it's guitar, vocals. Well, if it's guitar, it's me. Vocals, me and Dave both sing. So it's kind of nice we have that like predefined. It's we all have very specific jobs. It's not a band where there's like two guitarists and they swap out and do different things. There's not like lead and rhythms or anything like that.
Right.
It's just the three of us, and we write songs specifically around that. I mean, we don't rule out production stuff, but at the same time, it needs to work live. It needs to be like the three of us, a bit like the way Tool do it, where they're like, this is the song. It's from the four of us playing the song. It isn't like we've suddenly got 20 tracks of guitar in this one part. Like, and I don't have a problem with that at all. It's fantastic, and
Yeah.
I produce stuff like that all the time. But it's for this particular project, in fact, as part of the development of the band has been moving more towards a sort of streamlined approach, probably heavier and also more melodic at the same time, which is what everyone says, right? This new record is the heaviest and the most melodic, but it is both those things, because that's where we want to push. We want to push how heavy we can be without being like a Meshuggah sounding band,
Yes.
and we want how melodic we can be without being a purely pop sounding band. And I know for a fact that some people are going to hear some of the songs on the record and be like, oh man, this is so like, it's all vocals, oh god. And some people are going to love the melody and not really get the heavy parts. So right. You're always, but I feel like if you're being divisive, then at least you're being listened to. Whereas if it's someone, I'd rather there were people who like hated one aspect and loved another than just like
exactly,
didn't
man.
It's got to be compelling in some way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a way that where the two join is really interesting, and that's what's always interested me about heavy music in general. Is it's all about emotional power being presented in a technical way. That it's that perfect blend of art and science. So it's brutally technical in some ways, and it's absolutely raw and emotional in others. And the combination of those two things together is really interesting to me. And it's really, I think it's basically what most heavy music is built on, because what you're trying to do is just convey some sort of emotional impact. That's all you're ever really trying to do. And the way it feels when you're in a room and you're in a band, or you're in a room watching a band, and it's really just, there's no barrier between you and like an emotion that you feel. That's what we're all chasing. That's what we all want to get to. And our way of doing that is by combining heavy riffs, complex time signature stuff, and these big soaring melodies that stay in your brain.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I cannot wait to hear the rest of this album, man. Like, I think the only thing at first that kind of like, at least for me, this is absolutely a personal opinion, because I'm used to all my album covers ever either being paintings right here, or you know, like these fictional characters, and they're just like, oh, I'm fucking here, you know. I think the album cover was like the only thing I was like, huh?
Yep.
But also, you know, I have yet to listen to the entirety of the record, so
that's also a deliberate thing, and it's the same thought process, which is what's interesting about doing the same thing that everyone else has done. Okay, there are loads of cool things that are really inspiring, and obviously it could look like a Cannibal Corpse cover, right? But that wouldn't really truly represent anything. And the whole front image, which I drew actually, is the juxtaposition of the kind of normal and alien together, right? But presenting it in that really blunt, like bright color, like kind of pop punk kind of looking thing almost. That's like the opposite of our band. Was a very deliberate choice, because we're like, why not? Why not be like big and punchy and bright fucking red? And then the music is not necessarily, doesn't really feel like that. And some of our visuals are going to be totally different. Like Alina, who does our videos, is a constant source of amazement for us, because she always comes up with mad stuff that's based on the same narratives and same ideas, but it's totally different. And I think it's very easy to find yourself just moving forwards in a way that seems like route one. This is what you do. You're in this heavy band, you have a breakdown, you have a scream vocal, and then your album cover is like a logo that you can't really read, and like it's very dark imagery. Now, don't get me wrong, that stuff is sick. I love it. I love lots of bands, but it isn't our band. We're not really that band. We're a weird mishmash of different influences. In the same way that I don't expect a Carnival cover to be like straight up and down either. I expect that to be kind of weird, and who knows what it's going to be like. And they're a bigger influence on us than a lot of the heavier bands would be, because they do that really beautiful melody as well. So very interesting that you thought that, because it's very deliberate on our part. We're deliberately choosing that path, and it will be divisive, and people will probably hate it. But in a way, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I'm fine with it.
It's good marketing, man. It's good marketing when you can have a band like you do that already sounds like it could be made by Martians or some shit, just like with how out there it is, but in the best way. And then you have an album cover that could easily be like in an art museum, at least to me. So that could easily be a compliment. It
could be like a 30 Seconds to Mars type cover, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what we think. We love that kind of cinematic approach. And I don't know, it feels really wrong for us to just do the same old thing. We were trying to do something kind of different. The same thing with Semaphore. It's like a big bright yellow. That album is all like a sci-fi. That really is made by Martians, because it's literally all sci-fi. This Tempus is not a sci-fi narrative. It's a historical fiction. So it's based on the time that things that we've kind of all agreed are historical events, and we're finding little interesting ideas and stories that come from within them. So from the point of view of the person in that event. So Deny the Sun is based on, it's written from the viewpoint of the Pope at the time of Galileo, being told by the guy he knew, Galileo, they were friends, that he had like worked some stuff out and he was pretty sure the sun was in the middle, and that kind of changed everyone's perspective on their surroundings to such a degree that what would that feel like if you're that guy being told that everything you believe in has just shifted sideways?
Yeah.
How do you present that? How do you reconcile it with your worldview? That was the thought behind it, which sounds like such a strange thing to write a song about, but it was one of the first ones we did. And then as you go through the record, like the opening track, just called Hydrogen, is set on the Hindenburg just before it blows up. And the idea is that there's a guy in there who's a saboteur who's going to deliberately set fire to it. But he has like, it's from his point of view, and then he has like cold feet and decides that he can't go through with it. But then somebody catches him, and in the scuffle, some sparks fly and it goes up anyway. It's that. We're just picking these weird little things that we can write about and making stories out of them where there's already a story, but we're trying to kind of pervert it or imagine what it might be like from a point of view that no one's experienced before.
Right. No, that's actually really cool, and I cannot wait to talk more about that record as we dive deeper into session, because like historical fiction, kind of like headcanon based off of actual events, I don't think that's really been done before, at least to my knowledge, to any bands. In
the movie world, for example, but in terms of as lyrical content, I think it's slightly more rare. Like, yeah. And again, we like to pick themes that we can all collaborate on, because that's the way we work. Is we'll all, once we're happy with the sort of instrumental side of things, then we'll all collaboratively write the melody, and we'll all collaboratively come up with an idea for the song, and then we'll all come up with the lyric, which again is strange, but it works really well for us. It hasn't always worked that way. We used to do things a bit differently, but as we've developed as a band, because we've been working together for so long on different projects, it's become more and more and more collaborative, which is really nice.
Yeah, more collaborative, more interconnected, more comfortable, and that's how it should be. Like, at least as a musician who's like barely scraping together a lineup, right? I'm like only at that part where I'm trying to find other people. That way, I'm not spending 250 upwards on one track. You know,
normal people, yeah.
Like that first step, you know what I mean? That's one thing I daydream about, is one day when I get the lineup together, we're as comfortable and interconnected as to just being able to write music together on that level, and everybody contributes a little piece to the puzzle. You know, like,
it's a commonly misunderstood thing. Everyone thinks that you just meet a couple of people and it's like this big. Maybe it's like that for some people, but I think what usually happens, there'll be some kind of relationships that build over a long time. And like, I've been playing with Billy since 2003, literally, like a very long time in different projects. I met him when he was producing a band I was in, and then we started a band together, and Dave joined that band, and then that band broke up and we decided to do a new thing. So and Dave's been in the band since 2008. So even though, so for example, the relationships between the three people in this band predate the band. Like we've been working together for many years before we started this project in like 2011, 2012. So, and that's already ages ago now. This is the funny thing. This is our fourth album. So the misconception, I think, is you only see people once they've broken through a certain point in their career and they've moved somehow into the public consciousness in some way. And in our world, it's like in a really small way. You know, people in the supermarket don't know who any of these people that we like are, right? They might have heard of Metallica, but that's about it. So it's you only see people when they're in that mode where you feel like, wow, they've really like made this thing happen. But it usually took them years and years of work. And if it happens when people are young, it's usually because they were working when they were even younger. And I think it's always tempting to see things as like these overnight successes, but they're usually years in the making. And then there's a moment of snowballing, but usually it's a hard graft, man. And working with a lot of people you end up clashing with and finding relationships that don't work. And it's like, you know, people don't get married to the first person they meet. Usually that's, you know, it does happen, but it's not common. And it's the same thing with bands. Putting lineups together, it's like trying to find people that you want to be in a family with. That's very hard to do, and
Yes.
it often dysfunctional.
Yeah, dude, seriously. That's so funny that you mentioned that, because when it comes to like bands like While She Sleeps, right? Over in
Hmm.
Sheffield, England, like literally a brotherhood. And then they have come to trust each other over time so well. They create a company together. They got a warehouse together. And, now they call their fan base the Sleep Society. They make a whole business off of it. They're
Awesome.
profiting. They're doing really, really good. Like, that's another thing I daydream about, is really when I was in middle school and high school,
Hmm.
I was always dragon chasing, as far as trying to convince my best friends who maybe aren't even musicians at all. I'm like, yo, you
That's the
should
class.
absolutely aim to be the drummer for this random ass band project that I have. He's
Do you
like,
know
I
what?
mean, yeah, that's always sounded cool, but
You, you,
I've never touched a kit.
that, so in this band, I was just the guitarist in the previous thing I was working in, and when me and Billy started working on stuff, and we were having a conversation about who should do vocals, and I was like, well, I'll do it, and he's like, you don't even sing, and I was like, I'll go and get lessons, I'll just learn. So at about 23 or 24 or something, I started like learning how to do vocals. So it was only because I wanted to sing in the band. I think like Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy did this. He was a drummer, and he only became a singer so that people would take him seriously about his songwriting ideas. Like, it's not so stupid to do that, because if you already find someone that you have a really good working relationship with and you really like that person, if they're on board, like they want to do the work, then yeah, why not go and learn the bass guitar, man, be in my band. Like, in a way,
Exactly.
otherwise what you're essentially doing is you're asking a bunch of people who've got loads of experience and they're like excellent players to be like unpaid session musicians in your band, which doesn't work. Like, so they have to be part of that process. And we talk to a lot of young artists, and it's a very common issue they have, is like, how do you find the people to be in this project? And the answer is, it's really, really difficult. It's not a bad idea. Like, find people you already like working with and just make them learn the drums.
Yeah,
I mean,
dude.
I quite like it.
No, it's crazy. And like looking back on all of those, ambitious things I was trying out with like my buddies who were like, yeah, I mean, doing the drums would be pretty cool, but like,
Yeah.
they're, diving headfirst into full-time gaming when they're not in school, or they're in sports programs when they are in school. And I'm just like, man, I would really want to be in a band with you. Just pick up the fucking
Just
drum set, bro.
yeah. Yeah, who knows, man? I mean, it's the eternal struggle of being a musician. It's not really something you choose. It's kind of like an addiction that you have to put up with. And I think Mark Hogan from Periphery said I heard him describe it as like a monster that he has to make sure has 2 square meals a day. It's like,
At least two.
music's not going anywhere, so you might as well try and do it as much as you can. I think that's the
Exactly, man.
way it works for me.
Yeah, and the more you apply yourself, therefore, the more relevant you become over time. Like,
It's always just about trying to refine the process between having an idea and presenting it, right? So
yes,
that's all you're trying to do. You're trying to use this technical ability to present an idea. So you have to have the ideas, and then you have to just refine that process over time, and then B, you have to get good enough to present your ideas. And we're finding that really challenging, because the music we want to make is increasingly more and more complex, so we always have to up our game in terms of our technical ability to be able to even pull it off.
yeah,
So there's quite a lot of stuff that's really, really challenging to play on guitar and sing at the same time, for example. But it's a process. You have to break it down, learn it bar by bar, and then remember that there's about 1,000 kids on YouTube who are 16 that can probably do it already, so you better do it.
you better step up.
It's scary, man. Yeah.
So, as you know, we're kind of talking about the general atmosphere of music in general, getting bands assembled. What I want to do before we
Mm-hmm.
get too far into session, I want to isolate this session to your story, because that's usually the intention. And I mean, we've had a great start so far. We've talked about plenty of things. We've bounced back plenty of ideas as far as getting a band started, many overlapping things, overarching bird's eye view perspective, pinpoints in the Black Orchid Empire lore, the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to go ahead and take a little bit of time and tell your story, man, because I mean, you're the guy in session. You're the man of the hour. So if you can, basically what I would want you to do is go as early as possible that you feel is relevant to your roadmap as well. A riff lord, you know, a guitarist and a frontman and a singer for
Yeah.
Black Orchid Empire. Everything really that got you up to this point, you may take as much time as you need. Take it away, sir.
Well, it's a pretty big question, but it's pretty easy to answer in a lot of ways because my dad is a musician and has been his whole life, primarily a jazz saxophone player, but also a kind of sound designer and composer. So when I was a kid, I did like piano from the age of about 5. I got like solid, you know, grade 2 on piano or something before I got kind of really fed up with that because it was like learning an exam and then going through to the next thing. And I think it was the day that I finished an exam, and like the day after the exam, I had a lesson, and my teacher, who was a great teacher, but like just very entrenched in that system, was like, "Okay, let's start prepping for the next exam." And I was like, "Oh, what?" Like, then I got my dad got me a guitar when I was 10, and because I was like, piano, cool, but like, have you seen the electric guitar? Because that is definitely much cooler.
That's a shit.
Yeah. I was like a red like Squire Strat and a tiny amp, and it was cool as hell. And I went to my first lesson for that because you should get lessons, kids. YouTube's great, but you should talk to human beings. It's really, really useful. My teacher was like, "What song do you want to learn?" I was like, I don't understand the question. Like, what do you mean? Like, we're going to study, right? And he's like, "Yeah, but in order to study, we're going to learn a song." I was like, "Shut up." That's awesome. That was where love for the guitar being, and what that basically means is the piano was not a particularly efficient way for me to get my creative ideas across. It was just like an instrument that I was playing other people's music on. And the guitar, even though I was playing other people's music, it very quickly became through just emulation, it became a way I could create as well. So I would be obsessed with like learning songs, and I grew up through that kind of late, like mid to late 90s. So I was around in that kind of grungy era all the way through until like that kind of 2000s era new metal stuff was happening. So I saw all those bands playing arenas. I saw like Slipknot and all those guys just killing it, and it was so fun. When I was like a teenager,
Yes,
like kind of high school age, I guess, and because I'm old, so that was super cool because I got the upbringing from, so my dad's side was all this kind of jazz stuff. My stepdad is a blues guitarist, so there was all that sort of stuff going on, and both of them would I'd get things like, you know, Led Zeppelin and like Jimi Hendrix and all these incredible, the Beatles, all these incredible things that were really like, they were major for my parents' generation, and I got exposed to all of that, and that was really, really cool. And my dad also built a recording studio in our house when I was a kid. So when I was like 11 or 12 years old, I was helping wire up a studio, and we learned we kind of learned together how to do it. So that's been
really cool.
It was cool. I've been recording as long as I've been playing, which is kind of interesting. So it wasn't a thing where I had to learn an instrument for a long time and then suddenly record it and realize I like couldn't do shit.
Like...
Yeah. I was recording and abusing myself by playing to a metronome when I was younger as well. But then I always had this image that music was a thing that was really fun and it was great to do, and I really respected people that did it. But there was a big disconnect where I never felt like it was a career. It was always something that some lucky people got to do by some sort of magic act, which is, you know, true still. But I never really took it seriously. So I went up. I applied to do art. I was going to do art at university, and all through school, that was what I was really. Band stuff was like a hobby, and like,
yeah.
And then when I got to like, I actually like applied to a load of universities, and I got to these like open days, and I was like, no, this isn't what I want to do at all. This is not these aren't my people. This is just like people doing. I wanted to draw pictures of Judge Dredd and shit. And it was like people with like a huge folder full of just circles, and they're going mad. Like, that's not me. I'm out. So then I took a year and I went and worked in a guitar shop for like my gap year in Birmingham in England, and which of course is the place where so many bands came from. Like Robert Plant was on the doorstep of the guitar shop one day when I got to work. Like that's the kind of place it was. So that was amazing, and that made me realize I wanted to reapply and go and do music. So I did music technology and got into like the production side. Again, still not really thinking it was a career, but just thinking it was something I really wanted to do and I wanted to learn more about. And then that's during university was when I met Billy, and then we started Cape Fear together, which is the previous project we were in. Went through just some cool stuff, some cool shows, supported some big bands, did some cool stuff, made a record, and then through various lineup changes, ended up finding Dave to join that band as the bass player. And then the guitarist at the time left. So we spent a bit of time trying to replace the guitarist and trying to do the same thing. And then we realized basically we were just making the music we thought people would like. It's this kind of radio rock thing, right? And it was cool, but we didn't believe in it really. We realized this with a bit of help from people. It was a bit of a moment where we had a rehearsal and there was a friend of ours and he was like, this isn't really what you want to do. Like, why aren't you doing what you want to do? So then we started jamming as the three of us and we started writing all this new stuff. And that's when we wrote the whole of the first like Black Orchid Empire record and did realize that we accidentally made a new band and then scrapped. We just took the entire project we had, threw it away and started again with the new stuff. Ended up one of our first shows playing like a competition thing. And then we got to go to Germany and play a festival there and met loads of interesting people. Fast forward to about 2014. We'd all been producing and working with lots of other bands and stuff in our kind of spare time around jobs. And we decided to kind of take the plunge and get our own spot. So the place I'm in right now is our studio that we built then. And I got made redundant from a job I was working on 3 weeks before my first kid was born. And then about 3 or 4 weeks after that, we built the studio and we've been here ever since then, making it work as producers and as writers. And we've got 2 studios in this building and we do loads of other stuff. So, and at the same time, moving our band forward and signing, after we did a self-release for our first record, we got signed by Long Branch, who are a really cool German label. Yeah. They're really good. And still love Manuel over there. Guy. And then released a couple of records through them, and they've just now recently moved over to Season of Mist. Yeah, Michael's a really good guy, and so that's the kind of broad strokes of it. Literally since from 5 years old to now, that's pretty much it. But what changed though is that I realized that in order to make a career in music happen, I had to build one from scratch. I couldn't join someone else's career. It didn't exist. So there was no career path. There still is no career path. But what you can do is you can just start working on stuff in any way that you can. So I only got into recording, by mistake really, because of the stuff that my dad was doing and because I was interested in music. And I got into recording because I wanted to record my own music. And then, learned back in the day, learned Cubase and Logic and Pro Tools and all that stuff, and became like a producer and a recording engineer almost by accident.
Yes.
And then realized I absolutely loved it. So now my biggest passion is recording and producing, and obviously the band fits perfectly with that. That's what we do. All 3 of us produce and write and work on other people's music and our own. In fact, sometimes it's quite hard to find the time to work on our own music, which is probably a good problem. But so I mean that's how that's kind of all come together. But the main thing was this realization that I wasn't going to be able to do, like, if you want to be an architect, there is a very clear path where you study, you pass a bunch of tests, you can get certified to be an architect, and then you can hopefully get a job in an architect's firm. And that's true for some careers. It's just not true for music, and it never has been and never will be, because music is this weird art form that is like, the current recorded music industry is a tiny little flash in the pan that's only happened in the last 100 years of human history. And before that, it was like court jesters basically performing in real time, and then like classical orchestras, all the way from like people doing choral music all the way through to massive classical orchestras. The whole idea that you could record it and listen to it at another time is like quite a new concept. And never mind then changing from wax cylinder to vinyl to cassette tape to mini now through to it's a very unpredictable, very strange environment, and you have to make a path in it. There will not be one presented to you ever.
Yeah, no, there's no blueprint for doing music. And what I think is really convenient really for you is that, like, you started out learning how to essentially play the music, record the music, present the music, and then, I mean, really just because you learned how to sound engineer, you got a really, really good head start. Because when it comes to making music, presenting it, collaborating with friends, helping them present their music, that's really the more, it ends up being the more professional and monetizing part really of the music. Because once you
Yeah.
learn how to apply yourself in a business sense to a creative medium, and this is something that like my old man, if nothing else relevant, he kind of taught me, is that yeah,
Mm.
you can have your hobby, you can have your creative medium, but can you apply it to like more professional standards? Can you apply it to a career? Is there a science behind it? Is there a study behind it? And I mean, for me, it's like I'm learning and trying to, I daydream really. That's all I'm doing right now because I'm like basically broke. So,
But you're talking to loads of people who've managed to jump over those hurdles. So like
exactly.
cooling, it's very interesting. It's a bit like Trey Xavier's podcast on how songs are made, where he does it because he was really interested in how songs are made.
Yes.
Like he's interviewing. In fact, he interviewed Ginger on there and a bunch of other people. But yeah, I mean that's how it works. You just surround yourself. I've had many incredible people help me and mentor me. For example, Billy, when I first met him, was way more in that kind of mentor role than he was in a bandmate role, and he became a bandmate. There's a guy called John Williams, who's a fantastic producer that I made some records with and wrote lots of stuff with. I helped him build his studio, and then we ended up writing. And now in more recent years, there's a guy called Hugh Goldsmith that I've been working with a lot, and he's massive in the UK pop music industry. And we've been working very closely with him, all of us, and on our kind of production side of stuff. And he's been incredible at teaching me how the music industry works and helping me navigate it. And I think you never do this stuff in a vacuum. It's really, really hard, and it's hard because not just because it's difficult to actually do, but just because it's difficult to know what to do in the first place. There's no starting point. It's I suppose it's similar to a lot of other creative industries. My wife used to work in feature film, and it was a similar thing where you just got a job as a runner or something, and you had to try and figure out how to make that happen. But at least there was an industry that employs hundreds of people every time it does a product. And that's the same for gaming or for like actual physical products. Like if you have a huge toothpaste company, you employ a lot of people. Like they're all involved in that. But music is a weird thing because it can be made by like a huge team of people. Like I think the budget for Untouchables by Korn was something like $4.1 million. But I mean, days gone past. Or if by like one person in the bedroom who just has like a vision and GarageBand or whatever, and they just make some stuff and put it out. And in a way, the modern idiom of the way we consume music has never been better for that. Like if you're like, I don't know, like a female guttural vocalist, you can find people that want to listen to what you do. If you're an Icelandic black metal band or you make weird like folk jazz, there's an audience somewhere, and you can find them. So that's pretty cool. And I think that's probably what's enabled any of us to be having these conversations in our lifetime. I don't know if any of us would have got a shot in 1972. Who knows? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Those are different times. They're like, like all these genre mixes, Satan, or whatever. Oh my God, it's so funny to think about.
That is not an elevator pitch which would have worked. You were like, if you've got Dillinger Escape Plan and you're trying to pitch to like a mainstream major label that sells like Motown records, that's not going to work, man. And that's why I think actually it was really interesting that the 2000s era, there's this part of heavy music where it got into the mainstream. Bands like Slipknot pushed it into the mainstream in a way that it really has had a very long-lasting impact. And the people who know who Metallica is, quite a lot of them have heard of Slipknot. They might have heard of it in a weird sort of like, oh yeah, kind of, but they have almost like a household name, and they make the most like mad shit. If you think about it, like I'd love to have been at one of their early sound checks.
No, seriously, dude. Like it's only really because of bands like Linkin Park, Slipknot. Yeah. Let's see. It was like the doom metal era, man. Like when Korn really peaked when they
Yeah.
really like just climbed into the charts and shit. Like that's the only reason I think that heavier music ended up being something that you could market, something you could advertise, something you could sell in stores, is because of bands like that. And I
Yeah.
mean, whether or not you happen to be a fan of Korn, Slipknot, Linkin Park, Mudvayne, System of a Down, like if you
Favorite.
happen, yeah, if you happen to not be a fan of those bands, you at least got to recognize what they did for heavier music. And it's because their music, the lyrical content, even I would say, is so authentic behind bands like System of a Down or Korn, like literally rooting from oppression and trauma and worldly conflicts. What's up?
That's the trick right there. That's the key point about it. The reason it's compelling, the reason that it impacts, is because at its heart, it's honest and real and authentic. And it doesn't matter if you're like 9 dudes dressed in crazy costumes, you still mean it, right? And that's where it differed. And that's what I felt engaging when I was like a kid and a teenager. I was like, these are people that are saying things that they really believe in. They're not just repeating a pop message of someone. They're not presenting a song in the same way that I felt like a lot of the stuff on Top of the Pops was just sort of, I get it, it's a catchy song, but someone's just presenting it to me. They're like the vehicle for the song, whereas those people actually feel like they really are saying something they truly believe in.
Yes, no, it's really cool. And it's, I mean, at least for me, because from a lyrical standpoint, like there are bands like Bro Job over here in the States that literally just talk about bullshit, but it's the heaviest thing ever. And now they're kind of separating from that identity. They're trying to create more honest, more authentic music, because it kind of ended up being the trope for that band is just like writing jokes about, 1,000 clapping asses, that type of stuff, or teeny weeny island, it's
still, in its own way, it's authentic because it's authentically not shit, and it's authentically trying to break a paradigm and going. And we are held back in a lot of ways in the heavy music world by having to be fucking serious the whole time, and like. And that's why you get bands like Party Cannon or whatever. Like they're just
Party Cannon. Yes.
Yeah. They stand out on a poster in a very deliberate way. It's the same thing, right? It's a bit more like on the nose than what I'm talking about with our stuff. But you see their logo. We played a festival. They were on next to us, so we were chatting. You see like their logo, and you're like, oh, those guys are fun. Like, and they're on the same, they're on the same bill as all these bands where you can't read the logo, and that's kind of, and they out way more than that, which is so funny because the reasons that the bands have the black metal logos is because they wanted to stick out from everyone else's back in the day. And it's a bit like that thing where you go to like a huge festival and like 60,000 people trying to be as alternative as they can all end up looking exactly the same, which is and I guess it's the way it works. So you're right, you can kind of like supersede yourself that way. But the important thing is that, I mean, what's cooler in a way than setting up a whole scene and then leaving it? That's kind of. But the main thing is people, especially nowadays, and it's one of the offshoots of the social media kind of paradigm, is that people can access your reality so much that they know when it's not real. So even the most pop of pop stars, if they're singing a song about going through a breakup and their Instagram followers know that they aren't going through a breakup, then that's still weird. It's really strange. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's definitely a factor.
Yeah, it can be kind of disconnected sometimes, and like it might be because in middle school, the kids that were like trying to oppress me and my friends and stuff like that's the stuff they were listening to, right? Like Tayo Cruz, Katy Perry, Drake, like all these other huge artists that are still just climbing the charts, making millions off their music, charging like $80 per t-shirt.
It's like being mad at vanilla ice cream for being everyone's favorite. It serves a perfectly viable purpose, and some movies need to be Transformers, and some movies need to be super weird like art house cinema. You know what I mean? They can't be all. You need variety. You need that. And without the central mainstream, which exists by the way because it's still delivering an emotional impact to people, it's just doing it on a much more sort of easy to access level. Without that, you don't get the contrast of anything that is outside of that.
Exactly.
I actually totally appreciate, and especially because I'm involved in that a lot. I write pop music all the time, but it can be, pop music can be utterly authentic as well. It's just sometimes not. And
sometimes not.
That's true of everything. But yeah, dude, I think what's happening as well is when you're a kid, you have these very kind of polarizing trends, right? So you were
Yes.
either in this group of people or in this other group of people. You were either in like, you're like the cool sporty kids, or you're like the weird goth kids, whatever. What's happening now, I think that still exists as like major societal kind of like tropes, really, I suppose it is.
Yes.
That the stereotypes do still exist, but actually what's happening is it's way more broken down into specific micro genres of
Yes.
sort of mini trends. So you'll get some people who are like obsessed by Lorna Shore, and then you'll get some other people who are obsessed by Sleep Token. You get some other people that are obsessed by like some random band from Korea you've never heard of. But the point, that's their little thing. It's not a big thing.
Yeah.
It's them and like 10 of their friends are really into this little subculture thing, and that's really cool because it means that everything is all over the place all the time, and we're not being controlled the same way by mass media in terms of our actual likes, except that we all watch the same shit on Netflix, and we are some ways. But in music terms anyway, it's a really positive thing how diverse everybody's tastes have become, and how much. And I don't know, because I'm not, thank God, a teenager at school anymore, but I don't think it's the same environment. I feel like people are probably a bit more blurry. They might listen to hip hop and another genre, you know what I mean? Like it's not, I don't really feel like, you can tell as well from the music that's being made, because there's so much blending going on, style blending, that must appeal to people who like lots of different styles.
Right, exactly. And it ends up being more applicable to the listener too, the more you like genre blend and shit, which is really cool. And then, I mean, these days, dude, we have bands that specifically theme themselves off of one anime, you know, Brand of Sacrifice theming themselves off of Berserk, at least with their two, like their latest two full lengths.
That's mad, isn't it? Talk about unique elevator pitches. But then on the other hand, that sounds kind of killer to me. Like, I'm kind of in. So like, and I guess you get people like Visions of Atlantis doing the pirate thing, right? They're like a symphonic metal, specifically pirate metal thing. but weirdly not quite, because they're not actually doing we are a pirate. They just kind of currently are.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Right.
But hey, though, what a brilliant place that you can have a band with hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners who are also into that, even though it's mad, and when you're trying to explain it to your parents, it doesn't make any sense.
It makes even less sense than I listen to music where people scream and they seem satanic, but they're not actually satanic. They're like, you're not listening to them anymore.
They're themed on a anime that to me feels very mainstream, but for you is definitely not, and is also like very specific.
Yes. No, it's great. The music world is getting so much more complex, but I love it. So again, we seem to be like drifting into the like bird's eye view over the whole freaking planet, you know, speaking for music and stuff. So I definitely wanted to try to re-isolate a little bit to your story. And I mean, we've talked plenty about your lineage. We've talked plenty, lineage, goofy me. We've talked plenty about your story, your lore. I think really before we get into the next half of the podcast session, I wanted to try to root some nostalgia out of you and like try to dig as much into the fine little details as possible. First question being, do you remember what your first guitar was ever?
Yeah, it was the first guitar I ever sort of touched was probably like a random old classical guitar that was my mum's, I think. But in terms of my own guitar, it was a red Squire Bullet Strat, I think, a Bullet. They predated Bullets. I worked in guitar stores, so I have filthy knowledge about guitars. But it's it was just like £100, and it was bright red, and I had a PV Bandit 10-inch amp. No, wait. PV Rage. The Bandit was a big thing. I had that later. It was a piece of shit, but it was awesome.
Well, I mean, you gotta start somewhere, man. You gotta sometimes you gotta start with a freaking like nylon acoustic 8-string guitar. You know.
Well, if you can't get past that, then you ain't going any further. That's
exactly.
Like, you could learn to drive in an Aston Martin if you like, but that's not going to help you. Do you know what I mean? But yes, that one.
And I think my next question would be, and this is like also really applicable to me because I'm trying to get into doing like clean, heavy vocals and playing bass guitar. So when it came to what ended up being finalized as your process as both the, the front man, a singer and a guitarist, like what really ended up helping you out as far as getting started, getting comfortable with doing two things at once as a musician?
So in the beginning, I played guitar a lot and sang a little bit. And the guitar has to be autopilot. The instrument has to be so technically there that you don't have to think about it, because if you have to choose which one to prioritize, you have to prioritize vocals. So therefore, because the vocals cannot be autopilot, you will never ever be able to autopilot vocals, essentially. So
Right.
guitar is the thing that is like, or the instrument side of it has to be really second nature. So that's the thing to concentrate on. The other thing is you have to have enough technical training on the vocal side to really feel. Vocals are a mad thing because they're an instrument that you can't see or touch, and nobody explains anything to you unless you have very specific help. So 100% get a vocal coach, which is not easy to do, but you can do it online. It just has to be a human being that has experience of navigating your way through it, because you cannot help yourself with an instrument that you can't actually physically engage with in any way. You don't have any nerve endings in your vocal cords. You can't move them independently. So the entire idea of learning to sing is about tricking your brain into doing the right thing. It's really stupid. So it's very difficult to do. But in terms of the synchronicity of the two, so like trying to figure out how to kind of do both things at once, it's about breaking it down into rhythmic chunks and then developing. So I quite often, there's a part on Deny the Sun, right? So in the middle of Deny the Sun, there's a breakdown bit and the guitar is going blah, 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 right? That's the rhythm, but it's against quarter notes. So it becomes a dotted eight. So it's.
Yeah.
So this is guitar, this is vocals. So I went on that rhythm. I tried to learn it first by doing my hands, right? And then I could transfer over to my right hand becoming my guitar, which of course involves a different thing on the left hand, and then like singing the quarter notes. So the other thing, so that's one way of doing it. It's very complicated, but that's I find that really hard, and it's taken a long time, and I'm still not quite comfortable with it, to be totally honest with you. It's a developing thing in rehearsals. But because, by the way, when we write music, we never take into account how to play it live. we always write it as the best possible thing it can be, and then figure out how to accomplish it, and that creates some headaches. The other thing is you can try slowing it really slowing it down with your instrument and singing. So maybe you can try going da 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 and figuring where the beats align and where they don't. So that can be another way of doing it. It's just like anything though, if you want to get good at a thing, do it a lot. That's really all it comes down to. So do loads of the instrument, do loads of the singing, and then do loads of both together. I used to hire rehearsal rooms. They had like a cheap rate if you walk in on the same day. So I had my vocal lesson, and in the same place where there was rehearsal rooms where I just would turn up with a guitar and be like, let me have the room. And then I would spend like 2 hours just on my own playing and singing, but at like gig volume with a PA, not like just in my bedroom pretending, because it's not the same. And the other thing, playing, like you can rehearse as much as you like. Rehearsals teach you songs, but rehearsals don't teach you shows. Shows teach you shows.
Yeah.
So you do rehearsals till you're confident, then you do shows, and after you've toured a song like once, you will be able to play that song forever. Like there's no way that will go away, but you won't be able to do it until you've played it lots of times in front of people and things have gone wrong and set on fire and you've cried. That kind of stuff has to happen.
Yeah, it has to end up being the more like, I don't even know, like in today's atmosphere, people want their memories and stuff, the things they remember most, to reside off of like more positive experience, right? But it ends up being kind of like the accidents, the mishaps, the trips and falls, the stumbles, like the failures, really.
I would go even further, and I'd say that doing something you can already do doesn't teach you anything, but fucking up something.
Yes.
So the process of learning is repeated failure until you have less failures. And then, like, just think about the first time you tried to learn a bass riff that was slightly too hard or whatever. You know, you went fail, fail, fail. Oh, actually, I got that a little bit right. Closer, 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 closer. And as long as you can be like actually honest with yourself about whether you're succeeding or failing, because that is the thing that when you're a young musician, you think you're awesome, and then you are not. And then yeah, you just reduce the failures, and it's the same with shows. You do stuff, shit goes wrong. You try not to let that happen again with your equipment, with your style, with your entire stage presence, with everything about the show. You just learn from it over time.
Yeah, seriously. And therefore, Blind Without Our Failures. Shout out to my band. Shout out to my project. Quick little plug. Arrow is now live. Go stream it, please.
Do it.
That's really cool. And it's really cool because, like, obviously there have been plenty of guests before. There have been plenty of musicians that I've spoken with that would easily recite that same statement religiously. And that's just how it works. When you're trying to get good at something, when you really want to devote something, you first have to fail. Because without those failures, you end up being blind, and just like the whole process, it could end up being hollow. You know what I mean? If you decide to ignore your failures and not acknowledge what you could improve, even if it is good, even if like millions of people are streaming it every day, but like at the end of the day, at the back of your mind, you're like, this is shit. It could have been better. When you're not acknowledging that, you don't end up progressing. You don't end up moving forward.
For some people, it's just not for them, especially touring, especially like playing live. Sometimes it can seem like something you really want, and you can be really passionate about it. And then when you get to actually do it, you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it would be like. It's most driving and not sleeping and having a shit time. And then you have like 30 minutes where you have a pretty good time, unless the show didn't go well. And then it's 100% shit. It's hard, man.
It's really hard. Yeah, it's a lifestyle not for the faint of heart. Like, unfortunately, yeah. It's it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of naive optimism, and it takes I don't know, it takes a lot of time, really. It takes a lot of time and homework and just muscle memory and all that shit. But thank you for providing the lore that you have so far for yourself, your first guitar, the process behind the synchronicities behind just like learning to do two instruments at once. Like, I've interviewed now a couple artists, a couple musicians who do the same thing. Shout out to Blake Mullins of Disembodied Tyrant, who basically does like Lorna Shore vocals, and then he also does Lorna Shore riffing and just guitar playing. It's insane. It's insane, dude. He is probably like one of my just for the sake of genre, he's probably like one of my biggest inspirations right now, just because of how hard he works all the time. But before we officially mark and go into the second half of the podcast, because I only got an hour now, I don't know how your time is looking. I wanted to go ahead and pluck 5 videos. Oh yeah. I wanted to go ahead and pluck off of you 5 different albums, artists, or major people that have really helped you get to the point where you have now as the, singer, guitarist, frontman of Black Orchid Empire, whether as inspiration or maybe from a technical aspect. Maybe these albums or artists like really help you define the sound, or you learn certain songs for them that help you pave the way. Like, let's go ahead and dig into that as much as we can with the time that we have.
Yeah, I have loads and loads of influences and people that I find inspiring. I've already mentioned a few of them as well, but specifically for this record, well, no, not just for this record, but for this project, I think. When I was kind of younger, massive fan of Tool. They taught me a lot about how music could be, heavy music especially, could be quite kind of cerebral and interesting in a way that you wouldn't normally expect. And I didn't really like them on record when I first heard it, but then I saw them live at Ozfest, and it was insane, and that made me really want to go and listen to the records again, which I did. So that was a really important journey, and that definitely inspired my guitar playing kind of mentality. And it didn't have an impact on me vocally in the same way, because I wasn't really concentrating on singing when I got into that. But it 100% did on guitar and song, the kind of songwriting side. And bands like, to mention a couple of others, Deftones, same thing, a huge thing for me, where it's so vibey, and the landscapes that they painted are so interesting to me. And Chino's such an amazing kind of sculptor of imagery. and very unique. I like bands where if you hear one tiny bit of that band, you know that it's that band. Like that means a lot to me, and they're very much in that place. Skin from Skunk Anansie, who we got to know because she came into the studio when we were making our first record, and is someone that was inspiring to me when I was like a kid. You know, it's insane, and she's been killing it for decades. And we got to go on tour with them, and they were just the best, and a constant reminder of how good a rock band can be and how good a show can be and how far we had to go to get to that point. We're one of those bands who really love to be pushed hard by the other bands that we're playing with. Like, I really want to be like anxious to do something amazing because I know that the other people on the bill are going to do that, and they're definitely like that. Another band in that way, more on the recorded side, because I've never actually seen them live, would be Carnival, I mentioned before, and like that's like Sound Awake is just a masterpiece of an album. It's huge, and Periphery as well are a massively important band to me, and Nolly as a producer is kind of one of my absolute heroes. So Ermin, who masters that stuff, also masters our stuff.
Oh shit.
I'm always like presenting a mix to him, thinking he's used to getting mixes from Nolly, so I better make sure it's decent. And that's Ermin's been amazing. Actually, he's been really helpful. So it's from a production point of view, and from a sort of sonic excellence point of view, he is just a giant in that world. And Periphery as a band, I absolutely adore. I've kind of they were probably the band that made me, them and Tesseract, and Monuments as well, as a sort of the three of those bands kind of definitely pushed me to sculpt the sound of what I was interested in. So I know it was true for all three of us, actually, just pushing us into that heavier, more progressive, kind of complex, because we used to be a way more sort of straight up and down rock band, more influenced by like Queens of the Stone Age and sort of edgy, rocky stuff, but less in the metal world.
Right.
But in terms of the heavier kind of the more metal stuff, 100% that kind of gent scene really pushed that in that kind of, I guess from about 2010, 2011 onwards, it had a big kind of impact, which is when it was all sort of kicking off. I used to work with Brown from Monuments in a guitar shop in London. And I remember him, he's the reason that I play in open tuning. I play in Dadgad and Badgad, because he showed me his tuning and he was just like shredding these tunes, and I was blown away by it.
Right.
He was doing Fell Silent at the time. And it wasn't until like years later that he ended up doing Monuments. And I was like, oh, I know that guy.
That's cool. Actually really cool. Yeah. Full circle moment there. Just seeing your buddies move up in the world of music. That must be really, really exciting. And I mean, same thing over here, man, over in the Sean Cross camp, bands like Nithful, bands like Disembodied Tyrant, Warm Shepherd, The Breathing Process, all the buddies in the Ignite the Church group. You're just like, boom. Just seeing them move up in the world has been really, really cool to see from afar. And to call them buddies has been like an absolute honor. So thank you for sharing with us 5 different albums / artists that ended up influencing you, kind of motivating you, pushing you forward with anticipation as far as everything you do creatively for Black Orchid Empire. And now we take a little ad break. We'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
And we are back. Welcome to what will be another episode of the Anatomy Podcast. I have no idea which number it's going to be, because we have a whole bunch of episodes on the back burner, but we have Paul Visser of Black Orchid Empire with us today. We just learned a whole bunch about his background as a musician, as a frontman, as a guitarist, and a singer for this band. Really cool music, something that's really kind of broken us away from what we usually do here over on the Sean Cross channel. Be sure to go check everything out over there. Like, for God's sake, dude, if you're here, you know what Sean Cross is, so make sure you go subscribe, please, and thank you. But as we descend into the second half of this session, and we're going to try to speed run this as best as possible, because I do have work at 8 a.m. and it's currently 7:07 a.m. for me. Basically, I think a great first question focusing on Black Orchid Empire, the band that you participate in, the band that you've done multiple records with a new record, Tempus Veritas, coming out, what is it, like March? I have it
April
right.
14th.
April 14th. Okay, Jesus. There you go. I'm glad you corrected me on that. People are like, oh, March? What? Like,
not out yet, man.
Right? So they got a new album coming out, Through Season of Mist. The album cover is really cool. It's really interesting. It's actually like really easy to like digest, I guess, from a color standpoint. Someone who is a graphic artist myself, it almost looks like it could be the cover for like a comic book or something, or a smaller narrative, which I like. And from what Paul has told us already, as far as the lyrical contents of this record, that should be really fun to talk about and kind of speed run through here in a couple minutes. But I think the first question, this is a question I try to ask every musician ever on the podcast, as like one of the earliest members, if not like one of the founding members for this project, why Black Orchid Empire for the name?
That is lost in the mists of drunken time. I don't really remember why. I don't know. I think I should have like a collection of interesting, completely fictional stories for the answer to that question, because it comes up. But the truth is, I can't quite remember why we called it that. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I think we were just trying to find some words that we liked, because that, in essence, people can give you lots of spiel about band names, and I'm sure they will. But there is a band that is very popular called Limp Bizkit, and you don't need to know anything else about band names. Sometimes shit just sticks. Yeah, I don't know, man. I really can't remember.
Cool. And I mean, if not that, if there wasn't like an intentional name that you were just like, yeah, that's what this means over time, like what has Black Orchid Empire and that name meant to you? Like, has there been a definition you've created in your own head for what that means?
Well, I guess it just becomes like a kind of catch-all for what we are trying to achieve as a band. You know, it becomes the identity of the band. So, but I think what it's always meant to us is there's something about the fact that it's 3 words and there's 3 of us, and it's very kind of, it's a strong little structure that works together. And it's about trying to blend things that you wouldn't normally expect to be blended together in a way that seems like they really have always been that way. That's kind of our whole ethos. So blending very, very mellow, very, very quiet dynamics with very, very aggressive, loud stuff. I think with music, all you really have is contrast, right? So that's what we're always trying to do, you know, melodic simplicity, melodic complexity, loudness and quietness, and darkness and lightness, and all those other things.
A balance.
So it's balance. It's balance, and it's blending, and it's finding something that makes sense in the middle of all of it.
That's awesome, man. I like that. And that's a good way, I think, to approach music, because when you know, nothing against any of the beatdown bands that I look up to, any of the deathcore bands that I look up to that almost exclusively stick to like heavier sides of music, or for example, maybe like Blood Command, or Ginger. Like there are so many artists out there who do really good at balancing, but there are others who stick to one formula, and they're like, okay, let's try to expand upon this where we can with all of the millions of subgenres we have at our disposal, because it is 2023. So a beatdown band could easily incorporate punk elements or spoken word, like Being as an Ocean mixing spoken word with metalcore, which I thought really worked well. And I mean, Being as an Ocean, you know who that is, really standout band. So there's a reason that they have accomplished what they have accomplished, is because among so many other millions of bands, man, like 1 in 4 people on the planet are musicians, are creators. So the music itself ends up getting so like complicated. It ends up becoming so distinguishable if you're focusing on the band. Otherwise, it kind of gets lost in the archives. It gets lost in the algorithm, and you're like, okay, so there's this one band, but there are also like these 16 other bands that I also listen to, kinda, but also definitely. And it just becomes so detailed, man, so detailed. It's like grains of rice or whatever. You're trying to look for that one, but you're like, there are millions on this beach, dude. Like, what's up? So Black Orchid Empire to me is definitely become one of those bands, at least in my algorithm, that really just stands out amongst the others. And wholeheartedly, I admit, at first it was because there was no heavy vocals, despite how like just groovy and heavy the instrumentals side of this music can get. But if you would want to, Paul, would you mind if we go track by track, do a general summary, and do some lyrical dissection for Tempus Veritas?
Yeah, for sure.
Sweet.
Assuming I can remember the track listing, of course.
Right. I have the track listing right here, so we're good to go. So
I how it starts, but it's been a while since I actually listened to it, which is really funny, isn't it? But that's how it works.
Yeah.
So it opens up with the kind of intro track, and we haven't really done. I suppose we did a really cool intro for Semaphore, but intro tracks are kind of a funny one. But we really wanted to set the scene with something kind of big and cinematic, and that's a little kind of sound designy cinematic piece that ends up turning into something with guitars that are in this. It's all in like this 9/8. I might boggle you with musical bullshit, so if I do, I'm sorry. It's all in this interesting like 9/8 time signature, and our plan was at one point for that to just sort of be just the intro, but it actually comes back as the riff in the next song, so it's kind of cool.
Oh shit. Okay. And if anything, whilst we're recognizing this as an intro track, kind of alluding to track 2, Hydrogen, what was the reason you guys ended up naming the record Tempus Veritas?
So it's Latin for, well, broadly speaking, my Latin translations aren't fantastic, but yeah, in time. So essentially, the only real truth you ever get is something that over a long enough period of time, lots of people agree on. And that's kind of what we all end up calling history. So it's a very interesting thing. And the whole album is about the idea that there is no such thing as objective truth. There's only subjective reality. And putting ourselves in situations where other people might call them truth, but thinking about the alternative kind of realities that could have existed or maybe did exist and we didn't know about, especially when you're talking history that have no written tradition, which some of the album deals with. So, yeah, it's basically a sum up of the entire idea.
Right, exactly, and that's pretty applicable if it's going to be the album name. But I like that you guys had this under, you had this together, you had it organized. I really do appreciate that as a musician and as a lyricist. So track 2, we have Hydrogen. What is going on here?
So that's about the Hindenburg disaster. So all of these tracks have these little historical pockets, and that is, as I mentioned in the previous chat we were having about the idea there's a saboteur on board the Hindenburg who's about to blow it up but gets kind of cold feet and then gets caught, and there's a fight. So from a narrative point of view, it's like just this really weird. It's probably set in about 1 second of actual time, but it's about all of the different crazy thoughts that can go through someone's mind. And it's like a poetic kind of ballad to the idea that that you couldn't go through with this thing,
right?
Yeah, set from that point of view.
Sweet. And being that, this is talking about an event, and the saboteur at hand is kind of hesitant, and he ends up inadvertently accomplishing what he was sent there to do in the first place. Did this song and its lyrical contents end up being a metaphor for anything specific in you or the other members' lives at the time?
So none of this is ever that. But I don't think you can help but talk about your own experience, because you only see the world through your own lens. That's it. So whenever you write, even if I asked you to write a gibberish song right now, you'd still tell me something about the way you see the world and about how you think. And everybody's narratives are different. So even though we're collectively writing a lyric, so don't forget, it's not just one person. We're all three involved in that. I think on this song, I probably had quite a chunk of it, actually, but it varies across the record. Sometimes I'll have it in my head. It's I don't think you can help it is the answer to my question. I don't think you can help reference the answer to your question. I don't think you can help referencing stuff, but it's not a conscious thing. No, we're not saying this is a metaphor for something that's happened in our own life, but I don't think we can help but for that to be the case.
Right, there you go. Track 3, The Raven. What's going on here?
Cool. That's like one of our favorites. That's the next single that's coming out, so you got to check that out.
Okay.
That is based on the idea that in the kind of sort of late 700s onwards, a lot of people came from Denmark. Viking settlers came to England, and that is set from the point of view of a settler who's been there and just is basically a farmer. They've lived there after the however they got there. There was obviously lots of very crazy kind of pillaging and fights, but after a certain time people just wanted to live, right? So this person has been farming and they're just existing in this new place, and they suddenly realize that they've stopped seeing omens of the old gods, and they're wondering if they've been abandoned by those gods and if they've been betrayed and left behind because they chose to go to a new place. And it's that inner conflict of wondering whether you made the right decision. Are you being hung out to dry by your own gods, or do they just not care because you're not there?
Right. No, that's interesting, and that's good for perspective, because you mentioned the subjugated realities and stuff, or like the relative realities, and that's definitely something that happens. Like, no matter what decision you make, sometimes when you make that decision, when you're there as a result of your decision, sometimes you're like, did I make the right choice? Does everything feel right? Because sometimes, you're so confident in a decision, you're so confident in a choice, and then when you finally get there, like you're uneasy, you're hesitant, and because it's a new environment, it's a new atmosphere that you're having to adapt to. It's a new part of your story that you were not prepared to write for, maybe. So definitely a valid standpoint, and I mean, I could definitely relate to that. So that's really cool. Track 4, we have Last Ronin.
That's like one of my favorites. So that is a proper kind of, it's one of the more like longer progressive. I don't know, is it that long, but it's very progressive. And it's like musically speaking, it's in that kind of Tool like genre, which absolutely. The song is, did you ever read an anime, a manga actually? Sorry, it was never. It probably was made into some anime. Did you ever read the manga Vagabond?
No, not yet.
It's about Miyamoto Musashi. So he was a Ronin, or just a kind of a samurai. I don't even know. He probably was just a Ronin. I don't even had a master at any point, but he was the best basically in this kind of Edo period Japan in the 1500s, and that's set in a point where he, at the end of his life, has gone through his entire process of winning hundreds of battles and being the most celebrated swordsman in the country, in the world even, and then realizing that he hasn't got anything left to prove and he's got nothing left to do. And kind of, how do you reconcile that thing where your entire life has been about progressing in this one specific way, and then suddenly you've kind of reached the end of your path? And I think what happened is he basically taught everything he knew to his apprentice and then died. But it's about being inside the mind of that person at that point. And he wrote a sort of treatise, I should say, called, I think it's The Way of the Five Rings, but I need to check that out. But that's what the song is talking about his philosophy. He was a philosopher and an artist as much as he was a swordsman.
Right.
So that's what that the reason I mentioned the manga is that's what the manga is about that character.
Okay, cool. And I mean, yeah, back in the day, dude, like, how many ended up like hyper fixating on one specific area, and maybe it just kind of fails or falls through at some point when they don't expect. It's a good thing we have so many people today with ADHD who are trying to be jack of all trades and learning as much as possible in like all relative aspects that also align with one path. For example, you just like becoming a musician, but also learning how to produce, going to university, becoming a singer as well, and then doing those two at the same time, as well as being a frontman, as well as participating in podcast sessions very similar to this. I don't know if there have been any predecessors. But no, like it's this is a call to arms for ADHD people for sure. We got track 5, Scarlet Haze.
So that's gonna be the main focus track when the album drops, and it's way more on the mellow, like kind of huge ballady sort of side of things. It does have some riffs as well, but I don't know if you know any of the Semaphore record. You probably don't, because I don't know if you knew about the band before this one. But
no, sir.
There's a song on there called "Winter Keeps Us Warm," and it's sort of in the same. This is the our version of that on this album, because I really love that huge, big melodic kind of rock song, and it's about Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, who it's set in the moment that he's just about to crash in his test pilot flight that would end up killing him, and he's spinning out, looking up at the stars that he's just realizing he's never going to get to see again. So it's quite a sort of bleak, but it's the lyric is it's about saying, I won't grow old, but I've learned to fly, which is quite cool. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting little. I doubt that he was actually that introspective in that moment, but that's where it was.
That's where the headcanon is. That's okay.
So that's what that's about.
Sweet. We got track 6, Deny the Sun, which we've already talked about a little bit.
Yes, that's about Pope Urban VIII was his name, being confronted by Galileo with the information that the ancient idea of the Earth being in the middle was about to be outdated by heliocentrism. So that's about essentially what that's about. In a bigger sense, though, is wrestling with the demons of what you know to be true versus what you suspect might be a new truth.
Yeah, there you go. And there we go to that. Glory to the King, which is like probably, the second single that's come out so far, but one of my favorites thus far. Glory to the King. What do we got going on here?
You're gonna love these ones. So this is about the sort of like Mesoamerican Mayan Emperor Montezuma, who at the time Hernan Cortez turns up from Spain as this kind of conquistador and explorer, and the people of Montezuma don't know what to do with this guy turning up these massive ships. It would have been like being invaded by aliens, right? They've never seen it. So they assume he must be the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, of course, and they worship him as a god until they see him bleed, and then they realize that he must in fact be a human, and then they fight and go to war and kill him. So that's the story of that, which is completely fictional in a lot of ways, except for the fact that these people existed, and it's based on, because this is what I was talking about earlier. You're not always dealing, like with the Viking stuff, you're not dealing with a written tradition. You're dealing with, like, at best, like mythology and legend and oral traditions, songs, things like that. And this is the same thing. We know that the people existed because there's some records of those things, but it's pretty hazy what the conversations would have been like. So that's why it's really interesting. You can just make up these stories. But I love the idea that it's written from this guy who feels completely affronted by the fact that he's just found out somebody who was worshipping as being this otherworldly, like, holy creature is actually just a normal man.
Just like, do you bleed? The Batman versus Superman moment.
It's show me how you bleed. Yeah.
Right. We got track 8, Summit.
Okay, so that's about one of the early attempts on Everest. Before the successful Edmund Hillary attempt, there was a couple of guys. I actually need to research the names of these people because they slipped my mind, but 2 people that went up there, and they've only ever found one of the bodies. They never found the other one, and on the other body somewhere there is a camera, which they haven't found as well. Nobody really knows what happened. The idea is that they found them very high up, very close to the summit, and we're talking a long time ago. This is pre a successful attempt on Everest. So the idea is that one of them kind of, as they get to the top, wanted to be the first one, and started getting in their own head about whether they were going to be betrayed by their partner, and ends up in a fight. The guy they find does have an axe hole in his head, but they're relatively sure that it was just from falling on an axe. But, right? There's got to be some stories there. So yeah, the idea is that these people have just lost their minds. And what it's really about, I guess, in a wider sense, is maintaining control when you're just on the cusp of something that has been a lifelong ambition, a lifelong dream, and how do you navigate actually achieving a goal of that magnitude and dealing with that.
Right. No, that's really important, is like remembering that when you're accomplishing something great, something greater than yourself, and with your friends, with your family, with your comrades and stuff, it's like there's a reason they're there with you. So don't lose hope. Don't resort to your primitive instincts and possibly betray them because of your own ambition. Like, have a sense of loyalty.
Yeah, it's a social network all over again. Yeah,
exactly. Track 9, we have Weakness.
Weakness is about a Templar knight who's committed themselves to guarding the Holy Grail, like the Indiana Jones style Holy Grail. But they've suddenly started to question whether or not is it even a real thing. Have they been given like a fool's test, and they start to question everything they believe about themselves, everything they believe about the situation. Again, it's about isolation, and it's about dealing with commitment, and dealing with something where how can you be sure that what you've committed yourself to is the right thing. And that's a song which I don't know if I'll be interested what you think about that, because the verse is like kind of a wonky, like heavy riff, kind of odd time stuff. The chorus is the most poppy dance Gavin dance style, like really poppy chorus, right? And then you only get two of those, and then you get the heaviest breakdown on the whole record. So there's even I may have done a blurb. There's definitely a blurb in there somewhere, but like it's the closest we get to like an actual sort of heavy breakdown. But it's after the poppiest. It's almost like a test. It's like if you can get through the poppiest choruses going,
you'll be rewarded.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Track 10, we have Vesuvius.
Obviously the mountain of the same name, but the idea is that there's somebody who believes wholeheartedly that they've been told by God that there's going to be this, they've seen it in a dream, there's going to be this big kind of apocalyptic moment, and nobody believes them, so they just lock them up, which means that they're locked in a cell screaming at everyone that it's going to be the end of the world, just like everyone else is who's locked in cells is probably screaming it's going to be the end of the world. Only in this case it actually is the end of the world, and they all become encased in ash after the volcano explodes. It's pretty chirpy. I'm trying to think, actually there's not a lot of positivity on this record.
Sometimes it's better like that, man. Like your Black Orchid Empire, from like the impression I've received so far, it's very much like positive, uplifting, rememberable choruses, like very, very iconic riffs, and just like the sense of groove. So I think it definitely ends up applying better when even the album cover, it seems like bright, cheery, colorful, but when you listen to the record, you have this opportunity listening to the session to understand the bleakness behind it. It's a good balance. It really works well. So the closing track for this massive record that I am so excited to listen to at the point that I do, we have Latimer.
Okay, so that's a really interesting concept. So I don't know how familiar you are with like British history, but there was the first Queen of England was Queen Mary the First, and she went down in history as Bloody Mary. But she was the daughter of King Henry VIII, and King Henry VIII was famously responsible for booting out Catholicism and starting the Protestant church, essentially, right? So he wanted to get divorced, he wanted to marry someone else, all that other stuff. He decided, I'm just going to have to change the entire country's religion to make that happen. So he did it. And but his daughter Mary was very, very staunch Catholic and hated her father because of his religious position. So this is about her coming into power. Now, what actually happened was it was like a smear campaign in history where the Protestants wanted to present themselves as much as possible as martyrs to Queen Mary. So that she went down in history as Bloody Mary for burning people at the stake. But it turns out she only burned roughly the normal number of people at the stake.
Oh, okay.
which is quite a lot of people. It's like a couple of hundred people. But she got this reputation, and it's partly about smearing her because she was the first queen, I think, and partly because it was a way of securing long term the demise of Catholicism in the UK, which is quite interesting. And so the song is written from the point of view of a guy called Hugh Latimer, who was a Protestant who was being burned at the stake. And there's record of this. This is a real person that really happened. And it's his point of view when he's like, bring it on, because if you martyr me, it will secure my religion forever. And that's pretty much what happened. So it's quite an interesting, but it's being right inside the head of a guy who's being put to this, been burned at the stake, but for reasons he believes are good ones. And he's kind of stoked on the whole idea. Which is mad.
Yeah, that's crazy, dude. And like, what a great way to wrap up a record, because like, you're telling the story of someone who in the end is just like absolutely comfortable and confident in what they're saying and what they're believing, and is even willing to die for that mindset. You find that these days plenty of people are still like that, but also
Mhm.
plenty of people aren't. Plenty of people
Mhm.
are shaky with their beliefs. They're shaky with their ideologies because it's survival of the fittest. And now, this has been something throughout all of human history, really. It's like it could even break down to your beliefs that get you killed, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, just remembering to, be comfortable. And I think one way that I can apply my ideologies and philosophies to this is that no matter the hundreds of changes that you make to yourself, there will always be like 100 people to spit in your face and to try to tear you down, whether it be friends, family, or absolute strangers. So it's like this song ends up being one of those musical efforts that kind of concretes that, endorses it, supports it, backs it up, provides it a spine, provides it a backbone, because it's important to be comfortable with what you believe in, even if in the end it ends up getting you hurt, it ends up getting you killed, you end up losing certain opportunities because of what you believe in. And I mean, for Black Orchid Empire and for the rest of this record, it's like this could easily be a way of saying we are Black Orchid Empire. We are comfortable with what we're doing right now. We're constantly trying to expand, but we kind of die on this hill as far
Yeah.
as what we do and how strange and how different our music can be. And we hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Like that's kind of the impression, speaking for Black Orchid Empire, from a real life perspective that I am able to kind of like pluck from this. But what a great record. At least lyrically speaking, I haven't heard it yet. I hope to be hearing it very, very soon. Because this is very different from what I usually end up checking out for the channel. And this is very different from the other bands that we've hosted on the Anatomy podcast. But currently, ladies and gentlemen, that will be the end of the Under the Skin segment for this episode. And as we're preparing to wrap up this episode, I want to thank Paul Visser for taking the time, taking the opportunity to sit down and talk with us, provide us his insight on what it means to be a musician in the position that he is, currently collaborating, currently creating, and just making all this great music for Black Orchid Empire. I wanted to give a shout out to James, who provided the opportunity for this to happen in the first place, as well as recommending us other bands like Seeing Things from Czechoslovakia, which we are working on an opportunity with as we speak, as well as just other bands that he's recommended us and has gotten us in touch with. And I don't know, like, is there anything else you were wanting to mention or shout out, Paul, before we wrap up this episode?
I mean, thanks for having me, man. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. No, I just really hope people are stoked on the record. April 14th is the time to check it out. And we'll be touring as well. Hopefully we can get over to the States at some point. That'd be amazing. But yeah, I'm just genuinely interested to see how this record connects with people. And it's the record we wanted to make for ourselves. And it's going to be really interesting to see how other people feel about it. But thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. And most likely this episode will be premiering alongside the record, along with the Under the Skin session. That way, any listeners, any audience for Black Orchid Empire thus far can be provided better insight onto this new musical effort from this three-piece band from the UK. It was cool to reach across the pond once again,
Yeah.
go over to the UK, because we've been to Spain now, we've been to Malaysia. Hopefully it'll be Japan someday, because God, I want to talk to Japanese bands so bad. But it's a work in progress. And nonetheless, for all of you fans who have listened to our sessions before, shout out to those in Ireland that have been checking out, because we hosted Party Cannon on the Anatomy podcast. That was actually our first in-person session, so it was really cool. You mentioned them earlier, and that's why I got all giddy and excited. I'm like, this guy knows this band. Really, really cool stuff. But thank you guys for stopping by for what will be an early morning session here on the 9th of March. Thank you again, Paul, and to the rest of you. Be sure to enjoy your day and stay tuned for more episodes.